Hi, welcome to History with Dan, and this is my video about Connecticut's Octagon Houses. And I actually wrote about this topic in an article that appeared in the winter 2018-19 issue of Connecticut Explored magazine, and I will put a link for that article in the description down below. So what is an Octagon house? Well, there was actually a fad back in the 1850s and 60s of building houses that were shaped like octagons, and the fad was started by a man named Orson Squire Fowler, and he was an interesting character. He actually was a proponent of a lot of extreme theories, things that have been discredited today. So he was a leading proponent of phrenology, which was a kind of a pseudoscience that said that you could tell a lot of people's personality traits and mental abilities based on the shapes of their skulls. And this is a famous phrenology head that you could use to try to determine which areas of the head determined which characteristics. This head was actually produced by Fowler's brother, Lorenzo Niles Fowler. But he was also interested in home building because he was building his own house in Fishkill, New York, and he built the house in the form of an octagon. And, you know, in a self-help book writing kind of way, he determined that this was the ideal shape for all kinds of houses, and he wanted to encourage people to build houses in an octagon shape. And he had a lot of theories behind this, and he expounded them in a book which went through many editions. The earliest was 1848. This is an edition from 1854. You can see the full title was A Home for All, or The Gravel Wall, an Octagon Mode of Building, New, Cheap, Convenient, Superior, and Adapted to Rich and Poor. So in building his own house in Fishkill, New York, he had observed that an octagon or 8-sided house enclosed more floor space than a square house with the same total wall length. And he thought that this would make houses much cheaper to build because they could enclose more floor space. And going together with the shape, he also advocated what he called the gravel wall construction method, which was a type of poured concrete, which he also thought would be much cheaper. And his own house, of course, was quite grand looking, but he also imagined much smaller, cheaper homes, and he thought that this would revolutionize housing and make housing much more affordable for everyone. That's why he called his book A Home for All. And he also thought that they would be easier to heat and cool, and with a rooftop cupola, it would allow natural sunlight and ventilation, making the houses healthier as well. The irony is that even though he wanted to make them cheap and readily available, most of the octagon houses that were built in response to his ideas were constructed by very affluent people, and often basically of brick or wood, and not using the type of concrete that he had imagined. So octagon houses were built all over the country. Here's a picture of one in Watertown, Wisconsin, built in 1853. Much more like his own home, quite grand, with 3 floors and balconies. Here's really only a slightly more modest one with a lot of Italianate features that's in Catskill, New York. So these were built all over, and there really was a fad for these houses, and they were mostly built in the 1850s and early 1860s before the fad eventually died out. Now, as you can see with this house and the previous one I showed, they are built of bricks, so they weren't using the concrete method that he advocated. And what you'll see in this house also is that a lot of the detailing, because this was the height of the popularity of the Italianate style in America, you can see a lot of Italianate features in the cupola on top and the brackets around the roof. So now we come to the question of what octagon houses survive in Connecticut. And this is a list of just the ones that are in existence now. There are many more that we can document that existed in the past, but this is what survives today. And there is a site that is an inventory of Octagon houses, and they have a page for Connecticut listing the houses, and I'll link that in the description below. I also list all of these octagons on my own website, historicbuildingsct.com. There's actually an octagon category where pictures of all of these houses can be found, and I will link that in the description below as well. So, what octagon houses survive in Connecticut today? So I'm going to show you each of the octagon houses, and these are all pictures that I took, some, over the past decade or more. So the first one is the Nathan Gould House in Bridgeport. I'm not showing these in any particular order, but this first one does show a lot of the typical features that you will see in these octagon houses. First of all, there's the stucco exterior, which is very common and would certainly be suitable to Fowler's ideas about a concrete construction. Even if the house was built of other materials, it could give that appearance with stucco. It also has the Italianate details that are typical, including the cupola and, of course, the brackets as well, which are typical of that style. So this is our first house. Our second house is called the Leete-Griswold House. This is in Guilford. This house may have been altered a little bit, but it does have the Italianate style cupola, and I'm not sure if that front entrance is original, but we are fortunate that this house was featured in the Historic American Buildings Survey, and I will put a link to that in the description below. But the survey actually made plans of the house and cross sections, so you can see the front elevation here, and then the side elevations, a section of the house, and then there are floor plans. So it starts in the basement, moves on to the first floor. You can see the arrangement of rooms, also that central staircase, which is typical of octagon houses. It moves on to the second floor, and then all the way up to the attic and cupola. So as I mentioned, the full survey is available. Actually, all of the Historic American Buildings Survey reports are located at the Library of Congress website. Now our next house is in CROMWELL. So here is the Beckwith House. Now this was quite a large house, and I can imagine when it was new it must have had balconies similar to the larger octagon houses that we've seen. But today a lot of its architectural details, its embellishments have been removed, and it actually serves as a building as part of a seminary. But it's quite a large house. It has a lot of additions on it now, and it may be one of the biggest ones around, at least in Connecticut. And then the next two I'm going to show are in Wallingford. These are actually on the same street. They were built in the 1850s. They both have cupolas and the stucco exteriors. The one on the right has brackets. The one on the left has an addition. You can see part of it there. So it was quite common for these houses to be altered later and expanded either with additional rooms or additional porches. Here's a house in East Hampton, which has a large porch on one side. And this house actually was open, I believe, for tours at one point a year or two ago. And the next one is also in East Hampton. So this house lacks a cupola, but it has the other typical features, the stucco exterior, the Italianate style brackets. Now there are actually 3 houses that are usually counted as octagons in East Hampton, at least on the Octagon inventory site. But the third one, the Tibbles house, is really not an octagon, it's more of an oval. And it must be included among the octagons because maybe the roof had 8 sides. The roof line, although now I think it has 12, but clearly it is in the family. It's related to octagons. It has the stucco exterior, it has the Italianate brackets, and it also was built right during the prime period, 1857, for the octagon fad. And our next house is in the town of Washington. There are actually two octagon houses in Washington. This one on Judea Cemetery Road, and the other one is off Nettleton Hollow Road, but that one was moved some years ago from being closer to the street to being on a private property that's hard to get a picture of. So I only have a picture of this one. And this is a good example of a rural octagon house. You know, it's not huge. It has later additions, obviously, and modern siding. Doesn't have a cupola. I don't know if it would have had brackets and other Italianate features at one time. A very similar house can be found in East Hartford. A lot of windows on this house and modern siding. And here's a fancy one in Mystic. This one has a wraparound porch, almost more of a Greek Revival style to the pediment there. So this is definitely a very grand home. And then perhaps the grandest in Connecticut, or potentially the grandest, is the Earl House in Danbury. I say potentially because right now the house is vacant. It's in a dilapidated condition. So if someday that can be restored, it's probably the closest of the surviving octagon houses to the house that Fowler would have built in Fishkill with 3 levels. It also has, you know, the porches on 2 of the levels, so definitely a very fine home. Probably the easiest octagons for people to drive by are on a busy road in Portland, Connecticut, Marlborough Street. And these are 2 houses. The Joseph Williams and Gilbert Stancliff houses are right next to each other. So these are very well-known octagon houses. They're in the National Register of Historic Places, and they have, you know, all the classic features: the stucco exterior, the cupola, the Italianate brackets. The one on the right is offices. I think the one on the left is apartments. So you can see some of the adaptation of a larger octagon house. And then there's 2 other octagons I want to mention. These are not really part of the Fowler-inspired fad directly, because that really flourished in the years just before the Civil War. These were built later. The one on the left is in New Haven. It's a little bit smaller than the others. It has a mansard roof, so built in 1875. It's kind of a different style, so I don't know if it really fits within that, directly within that Fowler tradition, but it is an 8-sided house. And the one on the right is much later, 1890. This was, I think, a Sears Roebuck kit house that was built. It's not even, you know, an octagon that has equal sides, so it's got definitely a different shape, a totally different, more of a Queen Anne inspired roof. So again, this is more of a later Victorian house and not really part of the octagon fad of the 1850s, but it does have 8 sides, so it's counted among octagons as well. And it does have brackets. So that concludes the list of octagon houses in Connecticut. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you are interested in octagon houses, please comment below. I'd be happy to see what you all have to say about octagons. And you can also visit my website, historicbuildingsct.com. Thanks.